Alright guys, welcome back. It's week 3, and throughout the first 2 weeks you guys learned a lot about offense and how to apply your attacks in an actual game. This week we're going to learn a little bit more about how to tie everything together using movement. And you hear all the time about fighters and boxers having good movement, having good footwork, light on their feet around the ring, and it's no different in Tekken. So the better you guys become at movement, the harder you make it for your opponent to hit you. Movement is often considered one of the hardest skills to learn in Tekken just because some of the more advanced techniques require a lot of practice and it's really hard to get down. But I think learning at least the basics of movement is really important in order for you to take that next step as a Tekken player. You know, once you start to get better and better, movement kind of becomes the key to everything. As a beginner starting off learning movement, I feel like less is more. Why overwhelm yourself with all these tedious things to master when you can work on other things that'll help you improve much faster? New players trying too soon to learn the more advanced movement techniques, I feel like is a really common bad habit. I just want to start off by taking a look at some of the basic movements and then we can go from there. First up is the backdash. Your character takes a quick step back, creating distance quickly. This is done by tapping back twice on your controller, aka double tap. You can sometimes use a quick backdash to make your enemies whiff their attacks completely. Since backdashing is considered a defensive movement, be ready to guard any incoming attacks while you're moving. The next basic movement is the forward dash. Pretty much the same as a backdash, but your character takes a quick step forward. It's used to cover space quickly and maybe go from, like, say, a neutral position to an attacking one. When you're using forward dash, it's important to have a reason for it or a plan since you leave yourself vulnerable momentarily. If you're going to attack afterwards, have it set in your mind what you want to do so that you can execute your plan flawlessly. For example, if you were to dash in an attack, you usually don't want to take too long in between the dash and the attack or else you'll leave yourself wide open for an attack. You can also utilize forward dash after landing a knockdown attack on your opponent so that you can apply pressure as they recover. The third basic movement I'm going to introduce you guys is sidestepping. Now, since Tekken is a 3D fighter, your character can move into the background and foreground. And in order to do this, you're going to want to tap, not hold, either up or down on your controller depending on which direction you want to go. Sidestepping can be used as an evasive maneuver at close or mid-range to avoid enemy attacks and potentially get a whiff punish. Be careful of enemy tracking attacks that are specifically designed to stop a sidestepping opponent. So the fourth basic movement is the sidewalk, and that's done by double tapping and holding up or down to continue moving into the foreground or background. You can use sidewalk to evade attacks, or better yet, reposition yourself to a better spot in the stage during a neutral position. Alright guys, so there you have it. Those were the 4 basic movements you're going to want to get started with in order to take advantage of this really unique aspect of Tekken. One thing you're going to want to avoid, unless you're Akuma, Eliza, Geese, or Noctis, is jumping. And unlike in many other fighting games, jumping around is just simply not a recommended movement tool in Tekken. While you're jumping around in the air, you leave yourself completely wide open, so jumping is a big no-no. Now that's not to be confused with some of your character's other jumping attacks, which can actually prove to be pretty good in some situations. So once you've got the 4 basic movements down, the first fundamental you're going to want to learn is just simply being able to combine those movements with some of your basic attacks. And that's really hard because when you're trying to do that, you're forcing your brain to work alongside your left hand or your right hand to combine these functions and perform them with little room for error in a fast-paced environment. I would compare it to kind of like playing a musical instrument where you're doing a lot of things at once, reading the notes, playing the instrument, and you don't have a lot of mistakes that you can make. So when you're moving around the stage, your opponent might decide to go for an attack. Be prepared to quickly guard since you leave yourself vulnerable while you're dashing and sidestepping. But it's very important to be able to quickly transition and guard if you notice your opponent going in for an attack. Combining sidestepping and dashing to form more advanced movement techniques is going to be the final piece of the puzzle. Moving around during neutral is a good way to create constant footwork and become a mobile target. Now that sounds real difficult, but keep in mind that to practice this, all you have to do is focus on that first half of your controller. There's no need to think about attacks if you're only practicing sidesteps and dashes. So sitting in practice mode and just moving around can be a good way to combine both your dashes and your sidesteps more efficiently. Do not be discouraged if you're having a hard time with movement. Movement, I feel like it's one of those things that's better to learn about early on so that you can properly work on it and improve on over time. So that's going to wrap up this week's lesson on movement, and do not be afraid if you're having trouble with part of the lesson. One thing I recommend to you guys that really helped me as a beginner was just taking notes, writing stuff down on paper to serve as reminders or tips for myself while I was playing. And that way I wasn't forcing myself to kind of memorize every little detail about the game. And I felt like it was better to tackle just one part at a time before moving on to the next. And I feel like that could be helpful for you guys if you're trying to learn the game right now. So with that said, here's this week's homework. Alright guys, so that's going to wrap up week 3. We're halfway home, and if you need to go back and watch any previous lessons or catch up on anything you missed, you can definitely do that. Or feel free to tweet at me with your questions as you go along, at TK Anakin. I'm always happy to help. We're also going to be covering this week's lesson a little bit more in depth on my upcoming Twitch stream, talking about movement a little bit more, so make sure you tune into that. Next week, we're going to talk about advanced combat. So until then guys, peace.